Who the hell can wait till morning? Talk now at latenightsportsradio.com.
Thank you for joining me for another edition of the Bob Sullivan Show here on latenightsportsradio.com. Today I'm joined by author of Michael Jordan, biography about Michael Jordan, and Kobe Bryant Showboat. Roland Lazenby, how are you doing today?
I'm great, Bob. Doing well.
Good. You've written many sports biographies, books about teams, whether it be the Showtime Lakers. With this upcoming Kobe book, where does this rank as far as interest level when you first got started in the project, and growth of interest while you were writing, or while you were putting the research together?
That's a great question. I had done the Jordan book, had gotten exhausted twice doing that. I mean, completely, thoroughly exhausted, and recovered while writing it, and then got exhausted again doing it. And I've always been a guy possessed of great energy and drive and all that good stuff. And so in that regard, I was worried about this. As far as the subject matter, there's so much of the Kobe story we didn't know. And I had written a book about him and spent a fair amount of time with him, quite a bit, early in his career, back in the late 90s. And and I'd followed his career and visited with him at games and stuff. And so I was eager to do this. I like studying. I guess the short answer I should have given you is I absolutely love studying intensely competitive personalities. And he's one of the top of that type of personality in the world. And so it's great fun to look at the array of elements related to that.
The thing that is so interesting to me about, whether it be Jordan or even Magic Johnson, Kobe, NBA players, the great ones, all the complexities that go into them, whether it be, they don't have a lot of, true friends off the court because they're just so focused on the job at hand. What was the one complexity that you found with Kobe that was different from any other athlete that you've studied before?
I hate to tell you, and I apologize for this, yeah, but the book is coming out October 20th, and I've been paid a lot of money to. I'm just trying to be as honest as I can here, and I'm under contract not to reveal intricate details. I've put a lot of time into this, and after October 25th, or on that day, I can talk about it. Otherwise, I risk being in violation of my contract. To answer it generally, well, it's tough to answer that question generally without just resorting to platitudes. I really can say that Kobe's public image is that he's somehow a contrived figure. And there are reasons for that, of course. It dates back to his earliest moments deciding to turn professional right out of high school, which was a big move back in 1996. But I can say that one of my goals in this was to track down just how organic his competitive nature is. And I can report safely without violating my contract that, contrary to a lot of public belief, first of all, you can't copy competitive nature. You can't say, well, I really like Michael Jordan, so I'm going to learn all of his moves, and then I'm going to learn exactly how he's competitive. It can't be done.
Yeah.
That is an organic thing. It was present in Kobe Bryant as a little guy. And so I really just began, as I do in any biography, whether it's Jerry West or Jordan or even a competitive coach such as Phil Jackson, the biography I did on him, Mind Games. You really just sort of document everything. I'm not a guy that makes a lot of sweeping declarations, the kind of stuff that really does drive internet traffic. I wrote 700 pages on Michael Jordan and never once said he was the greatest of all time or the GOAT. I just sort of let the story do the talking. And, basketball players can talk a lot of trash. When I'm writing the books about them, that's not my role. Some people have questioned why I called it Showboat instead of Black Mamba. And Black Mamba is sort of a shit-talking expression that Kobe dreamed up for himself. And Showboat was the nickname given to him by Shaquille O'Neal that drove a lot of Kobe's competitive nature. He was given that name for a reason. And so I'm just telling the story here. I'm not here to promote Kobe Bryant. I'm not here to denigrate Kobe Bryant. I just want the story to tell itself. And that's the same approach I took with Jordan. And it's funny, a lot of times I've noticed sometimes people will read into things what they see. There are certain things about these personalities that set people off. When people read the Jordan book, there were a huge number of them that found it inspiring, and another huge number that were angered by Michael Jordan. And, I'm not leading them either place. I'm just trying to show the complexities of the person and what it's like to have that person as a teammate. Because that's real. I mean, you can even find that kind of personality, not to the degree of either Kobe or Jordan. But, I've played years of pickup basketball, or I did. I'm too old for it now. But you can run into any kind of personality in athletic competition, and that's part of the fascination we as a culture have with competitors.
As a writer and somebody who, you've been to a few of the you've gone to a lot of finals games, but you look at this day and age with this is the perfect day and age to take things out of context and run with a headline. And this postseason, I guess the main headline where everybody freaked out was Draymond Green was asked a question about he just made a statement, I don't think we're better than the Showtime Lakers. And then Klay Thompson makes a joke, we're better than the Showtime Lakers. If you watch the press conference, it's clear he's joking. But everybody lost their minds about it. Old Lakers fans, current Laker fans, everybody saying this is why people don't like this team. But if you just watch the press conference, you can see that it was a tongue-in-cheek, just a joke. What is your take on all these? It's great. There's a double-edged sword. Everybody has a voice now, but that leads to too many people having a voice. And what is your take on people overreacting to little joke comments like that and not drastically taking things out of context?
I think it was the 1995 All-Star Game, long before the Internet was a huge presence as it is today, particularly in sports coverage. And I was at the All-Star Game. They have these scrums with reporters gathered around, and you have all these figures. Back then, you had all the figures in this huge conference room at a hotel, and the NBA media today isn't is much bigger than it was then, but there's still just a huge amount of people, and they're sort of cycling in and out, and somebody's asking Charles Barkley about groupies, and Charles, of course, is known for his quips. And so we're all standing around, and he turned, it was a producer for ESPN who asked the question, and he turned to a group of us there, mostly white sports writers, but he said, "See, that's why I hate white people." And everybody laughed. And a few hours later, I go back to my hotel room, and there is an ESPN story that says Charles Barkley says he hates white people. You may remember it.
Yeah.
And so I don't think humans need the internet to misconstrue intentions, to misrepresent context, and to do all the things that make for bad reporting. The kinds of things we all do in one form or another. Unfortunately, it's a very human business, writing and reporting about people, and it's fraught with shortcomings and failure. But the internet sure allows us to do it much faster and to amp it up, and to, we're just a culture of fireflies. We always have been, probably. But the internet allows us to be fireflies, or I guess moths to a flame. We're drawn. What I'm trying to say is we're moths to a flame, and when something hot hits, we all jump on there and want to throw in our opinion without really understanding what was said. I think that's probably it's probably gotten better with culture. You can imagine the witchcraft trials in Europe and America and all the cultures back in long ago in previous centuries, and you can imagine what a crowd could be, whether it was a lynch mob or a public burning, or maybe things are better. Maybe they're better than right now. The worst thing we do is get on the internet and fire away in stupidity, because and maybe it is too easy, but it's I think it's probably always been part of the human equation. It's just taken a different form and fashion today, but it is a big factor.
Looking at, the Warriors right now, obviously Steph Curry has not played, how he did in the regular season, and nobody wants to hear any excuses, whether it's his knee or whatever it may be. I do think there is a factor of, obviously last year LeBron didn't have any help as far as J.R. Smith, Shumpert didn't play well, and then he didn't have Love or Kyrie Irving for that whole series. But you look at with Steph Curry, I think that knee injury, it's, if he has a good game, it's tougher for him to bounce back from game to game. And I think that's affected him, not really athletically, but just as far as getting, that confidence, all the way back. I know he's had good games, but why do you think it is that everybody just despises this Warrior? Are we in just an era where everybody just has to hate LeBron and everybody has to hate the Warriors? Why does everybody have to hate every single thing about basketball right now? Why can't we just enjoy a great team, enjoy a great player that are going against each other in the finals?
Well, I'm glad that the instant reaction of humans isn't 2020. Well, we misunderstand all the time, and the great fun of writing books is going back, looking at the context, the circumstances, and offering many times another view of commonly held or commonly known events. It also involves trying to uncover all the things behind the scenes. I don't worry much about Steph Curry. He is a man of his time. He is playing a game that has changed dramatically. He has qualities and abilities that would be great in any age of basketball. I've watched Larry Bird, who was worshipped wildly, struggle mightily in the playoffs. The playoffs are very different. They come with a whole different level of pressure. And I'm not suggesting that the pressure is getting to Steph Curry. I think one of the remarkable things about him, in looking at tremendously confident competitors who are used to being, quote, the man, I don't know if I've ever seen a superstar, and Steph Curry is a superstar because he's changed the game. He's not necessarily a super athlete, but I don't think I've ever seen a superstar more comfortable in the concept of team. And to not just be saying things for effect, but when you look at all and I think, yes, Steph Curry gets his share of hate, but I think he gets a tremendous amount of love. I think there are a lot of people that admire him because he's handled this stuff so well. And all of the adulation and the craziness that comes with having some basketball success in a sports crazy culture at a time when politics and other facets of culture are so disappointing. But Steph Curry is a team guy. I was just listening to him, and he has an ability. I think it's a strength he draws from his mother to be very genuine and centered and able to handle it. And I really think that he wants his team to win. When he said he's not concerned about being the MVP of the playoffs, I think that's what makes the Warriors such a delight. They're a great team, and they are a great team in a new age for basketball. And so he's going to catch grief. The bottom line is it's all about performance. And when athletes play well, they are lionized. And when they don't play well, they are reviled. And that's not just basketball. That goes with it. I always enjoyed the Utah Jazz with Stockton and Malone because I remember doing an interview with Jerry Sloan years ago, who was a great competitor as a player, who got far more out of his game than his abilities. And, he said, you got to go out every night and lay your heart on the line and be willing to live with the consequences. And I've taught college. I've always tried to apply that phrase broadly. And that's why I am one of the many reasons I'm fascinated in writing about sports, because having taught so many college students over the years, I'll see people recoil from making a full and complete effort out of that fear of failure. Excuse me. And I think it's a wonderful thing. I think that a lot of players today, you can say what you want about them. I apologize for the call.
You're fine.
I've had a terrible cold. You can say what you want about how the generation has changed, and I've had many people call me about how AAU competition and the coddling of very young players is something we're witnessing at the upper levels of the game. I don't know if it's true or not, but it's certainly a complaint I hear a lot. But I do think this generation, the top competitors, I've heard them articulate the thing that Jerry Sloan told me years ago, and LeBron has articulated it. Again, I apologize. But they seem to be willing to lay it on the line and to live with the consequences. And so there are allegations that certain players show signs of being overly coddled. And I think a lot of their AAU coaches watch them and regret. I've talked to LeBron's AAU coach.
Yeah.
And many times. And, all of the money that went into, all of the shoe money that went into youth basketball back in the early 90s shifted the balance and the focus of the game. And it was followed by the attention of college recruiters. And I've coached a fair amount of youth basketball, including a fair amount of AAU. And it does change things. A lot of the players are identified at an early age, and then they never really have to do anything except lace up the shoes, show up, practice, play. Everything else is done for them. And so they're raised sort of like veal.
Mm-hmm.
And so these players in today's generation have to shake that off, and they do. Yeah. But it is a different world. They never had to go to the public courts. I'm astounded at the big name players today who have never actually played pickup basketball in the public courts. I've done it for years. I come from a generation where it was great fun. I've had everything from guns pulled on me to fist fights. I've seen people terribly injured. I've seen horrific arguments, all interspersed with tremendous moments of great joy. Yeah. And so we have the money in basketball has changed a lot of that. I do think that it has changed the game some, but I don't think it's prevented the top players from discovering their own relationship with the game. I just think it has changed the approach and the learning curve and the schedule, all of those things. Some it may affect, but those players might have been affected by other things in a different age. But by and large, I remember from a conversation I had with Jerry West years ago, the great players at any age are going to be great players. Now, the rules have changed over the years. The game has shifted dramatically from age to age. There's always that group of guys who seem to care at a much different level. It's much more important to them, and that's where the thing begins. And that's where the fan attention begins. How deeply does this person or that person care about the outcome? What are they willing to do to influence it? And this is not just short term. This is obviously the long-term approach to that. And so it's a fascinating equation, and it keeps changing.
A couple more questions before I let you go. Looking at the in the 90s, there was a lot of, interesting teams that you could kind of late 80s, early 90s, or late 80s into the 90s, where you had interesting teams like the Pistons or the Bad Boys were an interesting team. The Magic were.
I spent a lot of time with those Bad Boys. I did their championship books and travel with them and had tremendous regard for them.
Mm-hmm. They have endless stories. The Magic, that little 3-year window with Shaq and Penny was amazing. You look at the 90s Bulls, their 6 championships were interesting. The early times of Kobe and Shaq in the 90s. What is the story? What is the team that you think is going to intrigue you or intrigue other authors from this, the 2010 era? Is it the Warriors? I feel like the Warriors, there's not enough, I guess they're good, but I don't feel like there's enough drama on the surface right now. There might be more that we don't know about right now, but what is a team that you think is going to be delved into? Is it Heat with LeBron and Dwayne Wade, or who is it?
Well, I think the two we're looking at now, certainly the great Heat team that I think I think there have been extraordinary things that have been done. I don't think we know those stories yet. Mm-hmm. I always like to begin with the family stories and to go from there. I really like to try to keep the focus on the players as people, as human beings. And when we do that, when they're not just some figure from our video game or somebody, some image we watch on a video screen, then the stories offer us plenty, everything we need. There was a time when the public relations of the NBA sort of allowed the writers to move in and get to know them as people and write about those things, and there's still a bit of that going on. But that we have a much more managed environment today. A lot of that done out of necessity because of the success of basketball. It's such a global, cross-cultural movement that one of the casualties is a more relaxed media atmosphere. Nevertheless, I think it's part of the role of the journalist to find those human stories, to not go light on them, to find ways to tell them, and because these are metaphorical creatures. If you're supposed to lay your heart on the line and not fear the consequences, that's important whether you're in the business class or the first class or the regular seats. That's important wherever you head. And for better or for worse, this is part of the fabric of our storytelling for this age. And so we'll find those stories. They're out there. They're from losing teams in between, great teams. I'm amazed at, there are all sorts of negatives you can point out about the age of the internet, but there are so many brilliant young producers out there finding ways to tell the story. And, there used to be, when I came along, just a few points of access to a media life. Whether it's music or journalism or filmmaking, the one thing that technology has provided us is multiple points of access. And so the determined people are able to take that opportunity, combine it with their drive and their great ideas and their ability to develop insight, and they're able to make something of it. And so I think it's great. These are stories that will be told. I just hope I can keep telling them as long as I can.
Is there what do you think it is with old-time players that makes them, not warm up easily to Steph Curry or warm up to the Warriors? And is it strictly the three, that they're shooting threes all the time? That's not how the game was played back then. It seems like every new thing that comes along in the NBA, the old-time players never quite warm up to it.
Well, we're all making, and it's a great question, but we're all making a march toward the grave. Our time lives briefly. It's a big deal. And then it moves on. And people are motivated in many ways in an unarticulated manner by the desire to be remembered. And so we live in a changing world. The basketball is simply an element of that. The rules change, the game changes, the degree of difficulty shifts. certain acts, 8 years ago, I'm not sure Draymond Green he'd probably make a roster. I'm not sure if he would get playing time. He's a late second round draft, or he was a second round draft pick as it was. And so he's an absolutely essential player. And in some ways, the game today reminds me of the game I researched in the 1940s when a 6'2", I think he was 6'2", forward like Vern Mickelson was the power forward of the Minneapolis Lakers teams that won 6 titles. And these were tough, smart guys, but they had a big center, but they had a fully athletic wing player in Jim Pollard, and the pick and roll was big back then. You didn't have the 3-point shot, but you had it was a lot of two-handed set shooters that took deep shots. And so, we're sort of in a grand drama. I do hope that these battles over who's best, I hope they inspire more people to study the history of the game and to come to their own conclusions. I think it's interesting and fascinating. I don't get into a lot of it. I sort of give each person in each age his due. Like I said, I wrote a 700-page book about Jordan without declaring him the greatest of all time. The one thing that does trouble me, I guess there are 2 things. I do think the internet has created an awful lot of cowards. People make a lot of vicious comment without using their own names on their sites, and so I don't have much use for that. I think you be an upstanding human being, and you say what you have to say about someone under your own name, and if you do that, I can handle it. But the other thing is, I find an awful lot of people. I was walk-on in college football. I only weighed 160 pounds. I was playing Division I, but I had a wonderful year playing it. I played 3 years of rugby. I had a brother who's a brilliant athlete. Brilliant. Tremendous speed, everything. I was not. And so I think people who don't have athletic talent want to just fire away, and I think that some of that's come with the age of statistics and analytics. Suddenly, people who've never had athletic ability have greater dominion over the game as far as analyzing and judging athletic ability, and that's fine. It's fair and good and helpful. However, I do think people are quick to declare who's great, who's not great, who's greater than, who's less than. I think those things have to be decided on the floor. I'll be daggone if I'm some old guy writing a book where I'm going to pronounce one thing or another about a tradition of proud men competing in the NBA. I want to leave it to them to settle things on the floor. I do not want my opinions, as far as their athletic ability, to be considered something that supersedes the story on the floor. But we do risk today, a lot of times, we're all offering this about that. Let these guys play. I rarely have met a guy in the NBA that isn't impressive in one way or another. I'm amazed at how many of them handle the success financially, all those things. And so I think rushing, it's part of what defines a fan, I know, to seize on this player or that, this team or that. But at some point it becomes counterproductive. I let them play. That's always sort of been my attitude. I always enjoy seeing what people do.
It's interesting to me. I'm 26. I started my show when I was 22.
Congratulations. That's exactly what I'm talking about.
I mean, early on, I learned, well, like I was, I guess, a little bit more vulgar early on with the stuff I would say, and now I've kind of I've definitely toned it back as far as what I do, picking my spots, as far as not just doing stuff for shock value. And I think it's, and I have my name out there. I coach high school basketball. I coach high school baseball, and it's, the people that are saying the most outlandish stuff are obviously the ones that don't put their name behind things. And I think, the thing with Twitter is the only thing, obviously the negative far outweighs the positive. Like, nobody's going to, there's not going to be a story on, ESPN or whatever website about tweets of saying, hey, Steph, you did a great job tonight. Just, basic positive. It's always going to be what the person's tweeting at somebody's wife or girlfriend or, or their family members, whatever it may be. But I have found in this Twitter age that the players are not the most interesting players to follow on Twitter postgame. It is wives, girlfriends, brother, family members. I find those to be the most interesting follows, or people to look at their tweets during games or after games to see how they interact with fans that are, trying to poke them and try to get them to say something they don't want them to say, or that they shouldn't say, or however it may be. Those are the most interesting things to me. Sadly enough, and it should be what Woj is saying or what Simmons is saying. It should be the actual experts that I should be wanting to read. But I find myself going the TMZ route of, those are the most interesting follows, because I think those are the most pure emotion from those people that actually have a horse in the race, so to speak.
Well, I think every generation has its lessons to learn. Mm-hmm. And, we live in an age where human culture is the postmodern age. Change is unbelievably fast. A decade is now a century, maybe 2 centuries. And so I always would tell my media students, I would ask them about their monk power. If I was a wealthy, influential guy back in the Renaissance age, where or before, where everything is measured by how many monks you have copying manuscripts in dank rooms. They're writing by hand, trying to recreate these books. And if you look at the average person today, let's say that I was some rich or influential guy back in that age, and I might have 500 monks working for me. That would be a pretty big deal. And they could create those beautiful manuscripti, those handwritten books, because this was before the age of printing, obviously. And so today, what is the monk power of each person with a personal computer? It's trillions, because you're able to perform all these basic computations and complicated searches and analysis. And so this is a generation coming along. Never before have humans had such tremendous, unprecedented personal power. Power in terms of research, power in terms of audience and communication. It's staggering. And so I don't think you get that level of power without having to work through it. I think it's a tremendous challenge to learn to, and I don't know, I guess by the time every time we learn one thing or another with technology, it's speeding off in another direction. And, if you told me in the 1980s there would basically be almost no record stores in New York in the new century ahead, I would have been flabbergasted. So, we are moving at an incredible pace. We have tremendous personal power, and there are a lot of interesting ways to put that to use. And, you don't it doesn't come with too much of an owner's manual. You got to still figure it out as you go. And sports sort of gives us a place to practice in a lot of ways. But, you know, the important thing is that we always come around to the fact that we're all human. We're all capable of one thing or another and prone to many other things. And so it's all part of the great fun. And some people wonder if sports is just a trivial pursuit, but I think it's much more important than that. And it's instructive, and it's always a blast for me to see its applications.
Last question. Who is a historical figure from years back that is dead that you wish would have had Twitter?
Well, you know, it demeans people. I think a lot of leadership and command is aura and presence. When he was a great coach, it wasn't what Phil Jackson said, it was what he didn't say and how little he said and what he could do with a look. I remember coming out of Virginia Military Institute with no training in education and going to an inner city school where I was in a program for the very troubled kids coming out of the Department of Corrections, and it's a very tough program. And I'd played college football and 3 years of rugby, and I had a physical presence. But there was a skinny guy teaching math and science named Joe Williams, and he could take these kids who were socially promoted years ahead, some of them 17 or 18 in the 7th grade coming out of corrections. He could take these kids with a mere look and get them to follow 6 rules. He taught them algebra. He taught me how to teach. He was amazing. He was the lead singer in a soul band, math science teacher, and a Baptist minister. Still one of the truly most impressive people I've met in my life. And he did more with a look as Phil Jackson did. But then you take a guy like Phil Jackson, you put him on Twitter, and you get Goink. And the Goink comment that he's chided for so often. And so that's a great question. And you immediately want to jump to the great moral leaders, Gandhi, Christ. There's still a huge debate over his existence or what he was, and so I would have loved a little more documentation from way back in the day. We don't have it. There's a whole huge chunk of human history we don't. There's so little we actually do understand about history back several millennia. And so maybe somebody from deep in time rather than a public figure. I think that would be fascinating to be able to have a conversation. But I wouldn't want to diminish the leaders because leadership is aura. And I think that's probably an instructive lesson. I know it has been for me. I've had absolutely stupid moments on social media. Things that I regret. I mean, you don't have to have that loaded weapon long to begin to regret things you've said or done or actions you've taken. And so we follow people because we revere them. And social media is not the place to build reverence or leadership a lot of times. And so it can be, don't get me wrong, but that's part of your generation's discovery, values in the postmodern age, we're moving so fast. Some of the clunkiest things we have are our values. And so translating those things, that's just part of the challenge for your generation.
Well, Roland, I really appreciate you coming on, doing this interview. Do you want to tell everybody where we can find you on Twitter?
Yeah, it's at Lazenby, Lazenb as in boy, Y. I had a brilliant student, Andrew Major, at Virginia Tech, who got me on Twitter so early that I don't even have to have R Lazenby. It's just at Lazenby. And this, I had as a college instructor, I had students who changed my life with the things they taught me. And Andrew Major was one of those. I had many. And so, one of the things your generation is doing is teaching lots of lessons to the old fogies. So have at it.
Awesome. Well, I truly appreciate you coming on again. Look forward to your upcoming Kobe book. I loved Michael Jordan, The Life. I read that. And I am absolutely looking forward to this upcoming book and look forward to reading it.
Bob, thank you for the wonderful questions.